You want thicker, fuller brows. You're looking for brow regrowth. You want to see an increase in the number of brow hairs. And if that's something you're interested in, you may find yourself asking the question, what's better to use, Rogaine or Latisse? Let's talk about it. Thinning brows is actually a really common concern, increasingly more common, one might argue, these days. However, we don't have great epidemiologic studies. There are many possible reasons for thinning brows. You've heard someone lamenting their prior history of over-tweezing leading to their now thinner brows. And there is some truth to that. You know, if you've tweezed too aggressively, it can traumatize the hair follicle, even result in scarring of the follicle, and overall thinning sparse brows. It's also common for our brows to become thin with age, and in women, this is often coincides with menopause as well, and changes in the hormones which influence hair growth cycles, including our brow growth cycle. Speaking of hormones, thyroid disorder is a potential medical cause for thinning brows, especially the lateral aspect of the brows, and warrants further investigation because you don't want to sleep on a sick thyroid. Certain underlying skin conditions also can impact the brows. Atopic dermatitis, a type of eczema, can lead to loss of the lateral aspect of the brows. Also, keratosis pilaris, a dry skin condition impacting the hair follicles, otherwise known as rough and bumpy skin, can affect the brows in certain variants. Different hair loss disorders that affect the scalp also can affect the brows, such as alopecia areata, an autoimmune attack on the hair follicle that results in the sudden development of frank bald patches. Not only can that affect the scalp, but in some cases it might lead to brow loss. The hair loss condition lichen planopilaris, which is a hair follicle variant of lichen planus, can frequently impact the eyebrows. I have a video all about lichen planopilaris, or frontal fibrosing alopecia. Definitely check that out because we really do a deep dive in that video with regards to this condition, the treatment options available, including a discussion on brow findings. So as with anything, it's important to know what it is you're dealing with. You want to make sure you have a good understanding of why you have thinning brows to begin with before you go trying different serums. If you have an underlying thyroid disease, for example, don't sleep on that. It needs to be evaluated and properly treated before the brows can ever get back on track. But say you've got, age-related thinning, or you overdid it with the tweezers back in the day, or maybe you even struggle with trichotillomania, a condition where people, maybe when they get nervous, stressed out, pull at their hair to relieve stress, and they can do that for the brows as well. Maybe you have something like this and you're looking for something to get the brows growing again. Well, we have two main options. Rogaine, which is the brand name for minoxidil, a drug that is approved for topical use in the scalp for hair growth, but off-label is often recommended for brow growth. You also have Latisse, a brand name for the drug Bimatoprost, which is a prescription treatment for eyelash hypotrichosis. It's basically a prescription grade lash serum to grow the lashes, but applied elsewhere, off-label, can help with hair growth in certain areas, such as the brows. When it comes to eyebrow hypotrichosis, sparse brows, when it comes to treatments, minoxidil, aka Rogaine, versus Bimatoprost, aka Latisse, we really don't have great studies out there looking at these two drugs applied topically for the treatment of sparse thinning brows. So there are a lot of questions we really don't have good answers to. But here's what I can say. You want to know which one is better, minoxidil or Bimatoprost, Latisse or Rogaine. We have two studies looking at this exact question. The first was a while ago. It was a split-face study. It included 27 patients, all of them women. They applied to one brow minoxidil 3%, and to the other brow they applied Bimatoprost 0.03%, which is what you find in Latisse. That's the percentage in Latisse. And they did this daily for 16 weeks. At the end of the study, guess what? Both sides had comparable regrowth per the patients, and also the patients were equally satisfied with the regrowth they got on either brow. Obviously, there are some limitations. This isn't a randomized control trial. Split-face studies, they have their issues, but it does suggest that Rogaine versus Latisse seem to be pretty comparable in terms of the outcome of noticing an improvement in brow hair growth and overall satisfaction. Fast forward to 2023, and we now have have a slightly better study that looked at randomizing participants to either receive minoxidil 2%, which you can buy over the counter without a prescription, versus Bimatoprost 0.03%, the concentration found in Latisse, versus Bimatoprost 0.01%. Participants were randomized to get one of these three treatments and apply it to the brow area daily. There were approximately 20 participants in each of the three groups for a total of 60 participants. At the start of the study, all participants had roughly the same degree of eyebrow hypotrichosis. Photos were taken and trichoscopy was done to examine brow growth carefully throughout the study. The researchers used a validated 4-point scale to evaluate brow fullness and regrowth. The participants were on average in their mid-30s. And no surprise, similar to the first study, at the end of the 16 weeks, the outcomes amongst the different groups were, for the most part, pretty similar. The clinical improvement on a 3-point scale was about 2 for each of the groups. Each group had roughly a 4 micrometer improvement in brow diameter, and roughly, on average, 5 to 6 more brow hairs after 16 weeks of daily use. The main difference in the three groups that was statistically significant boiled down to overall satisfaction. At 16 weeks, the satisfaction in the group getting 0.03% Bimatoprost, aka Latisse, were statistically significantly more satisfied compared to 2% minoxidil and compared to the lower percentage of Bimatoprost. So this suggests that you might be happier with 0.03% Bimatoprost, aka Latisse. Now, side effects in these two studies were comparable. Overall, very safe. There weren't really major differences between Bimatoprost, aka Latisse, and minoxidil, aka Rogaine. So, which one is better? I mean, that's why you clicked into this video. So the results are similar. Here are some important points to keep in mind. First of all, these studies looked at minoxidil, aka Rogaine, between 2 and 3%. Would you get better results with 5% minoxidil? Possibly. We don't have a study looking at 5% minoxidil. I will say this, however, 2% minoxidil, which you can buy over the counter, versus 5% minoxidil, in the case of using it on the scalp, side effects tend to be less in the 2% group. Side effects of irritation and also unwanted hair growth tends to be less of an issue with 2%. The other thing to keep in mind is that these studies were done on women, who are the predominant demographic concerned with thinning brows. It does seem to be more of an issue that women encounter compared to men. Because these studies were done on women, we can't say for sure how effective these treatments are for men. Men might not respond optimally to 2% minoxidil. They might get better results with 5%. Again, something else we don't know. Men have thicker skin, and therefore these topical treatments might take longer to work, or you might actually need 5%. Who knows? These are just questions that we don't have answers to. While no significant side effects were encountered in the study, there are side effects with both minoxidil and with Bimatoprost, aka Latisse. So the side effects one will encounter with using minoxidil, say for the scalp, but also you might encounter this in the brow area, is it can be really irritating. A lot of people get like an eczema related to it. The other thing that you need to be aware of when it comes to minoxidil is that it shifts the hair growth cycle such that it puts more hair follicles into the growing phase. So what one can expect with starting minoxidil is that initially you get an increase in hair shedding, and that can be quite dramatic and really, frighten people, because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm losing more hair. You're not losing more hair, it's just shifting the hair cycle around to get more hairs into the growing phase, and in order to do that, as that's happening, hairs have to be shed. Now when we're talking about our brows, that can be pretty noticeable at first and very distressing. What about Bimatoprost, Latisse? Bimatoprost, Latisse might cause an increase in hair shedding as well. Also, keep in mind, Bimatoprost can lead to other side effects. Yes, it could be irritating, just like minoxidil, but with long-term use, Bimatoprost can lead to pigmentary changes. It can cause hyperpigmentation to the areas where you're applying it. Bimatoprost, like minoxidil, could also cause unwanted hair growth, so you need to be precise in where you're applying it. Also, Bimatoprost can cause fat loss around the eyes. That has been observed with certain lash serums that contain compounds similar to Bimatoprost, and it's been observed with Bimatoprost itself, especially when put directly in the eye, but it's just a potential side effect to keep in mind. What about accessibility? Well, like I said, here in the US, you can go to Walmart, Costco, and you can buy 2% minoxidil without a prescription and try this yourself. However, Bimatoprost, aka Latisse, requires a prescription. Now that being said, you also will encounter lash growth serums, brow growth serums that contain compounds in them that act just like Bimatoprost, which is what the drug is in Latisse. Now, are they as effective as Bimatoprost? We don't know, because in contrast to Bimatoprost and a drug, a medication, these ingredients are cosmetics and we don't have the data on them to say for sure how good they're going to be for you. While you can't buy Bimatoprost without a prescription, Latisse, you can buy these sort of dupes, if you will, that are not well studied. When you're just comparing the cost of Bimatoprost, Latisse versus 2% minoxidil, 2% minoxidil is likely to be significantly less expensive in the long run compared to the prescription Bimatoprost. So from a cost perspective, minoxidil, and remember, the studies that we do have, albeit limited, suggest that they're both equally effective in terms of brow regrowth. The other limitation here is that the studies only go out to 16 weeks. What happens after that? Is there a period where one drug outperforms the other? For example, what if you looked at 52 weeks? What if you looked at 3 years down the road? Another thing that we know about using minoxidil and using Bimatoprost to grow hair on the scalp or eyelashes is that, yes, the hair cycle gets shifted around to keep hair in the growing phase longer, anagen, but once you stop the treatment, whether it be minoxidil or Bimatoprost, the hair cycle rearranges and the hair that you grew while you were using the drug, whether it be minoxidil or Bimatoprost, will shed and you'll go back to how your hair would have been had you never used these drugs before. Then we have a lot of questions about protocols. So the protocols in these studies included applying these treatments daily, whether it be minoxidil or Bimatoprost. But what if you applied minoxidil twice a day? Would you get better results? Would you see results faster? What if you applied minoxidil 2% and then you followed it up, you double stacked with Bimatoprost, Latisse? Does that work? Can you layer the two in the brow area? We don't know. We don't have studies on that. Can you do minoxidil in the morning and Bimatoprost in the evening, or vice versa? We don't know. We don't have good studies on that. In summary, Rogaine versus Latisse, they're equally effective for brow growth in women at 16 weeks. Minoxidil might be more irritating, but it might be less expensive. Bimatoprost might cause side effects of hyperpigmentation, potentially periorbital fat loss, of course will be more expensive. You can buy minoxidil 2% without a prescription. Bimatoprost, Latisse requires a prescription, but instead of prescription Latisse, you might elect to use a cosmetic brow growth serum that contains Bimatoprost-like compounds, prostaglandin analogs. And there are a lot of products out there. I would say the vast majority of brow growth serums on the market or lash growth serums on the market contain compounds very similar to Bimatoprost with the same side effects that Bimatoprost comes with. One last point about minoxidil versus Latisse. Those of you who have pets, you need to be very, very careful with topical minoxidil. Topical minoxidil can be very toxic to animals if they ingest it. And trace amounts of topical minoxidil, such as what might be transferred to your pillow or if your pet licks your face, have resulted in harm to pets, cats, dogs, for example. So I caution those of you who are pet owners and use topical minoxidil to be very careful. Cases of animals being harmed by minoxidil seem to include even them being on the same pillowcase as somebody who has minoxidil on their scalp and it gets transferred. Also, a common exposure that harms pets is maybe you throw the applicator in the trash in your bathroom or the gloves that you use to apply it, and then your pet goes rummaging through your trash looking for a treat and encounters it that way. All right, y'all, that's what I wanted to talk about with regards to Bimatoprost versus minoxidil, two drugs for hair loss that could be used in the brow area, although the research is pretty limited and we need a lot better studies, more time with these drugs to really say, do they work? as well as we want them to. All right, y'all, I hope this video was informative. On the end slate, I'm going to put my video all about using castor oil in the brows. I know that's a popular at-home remedy, so check that one out next if you missed it. But if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget, sunscreen and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.